Good morning everyone. It's good to see you all here and welcome all. Those of you who are joining us for the first time and also those of you who were here last night for a very enjoyable and relaxed dinner. Particularly enjoyed the pudding, still thinking about it. And it's my great pleasure as Presiding Officer to welcome you to this, the 13th Business in the Parliament conference. And our conference is set against the backdrop of 20 years of the Scottish Parliament. And as part of that anniversary, Her Majesty the Queen was here earlier and she told us, through new initiatives you continue to strive to be responsive and accountable to the people you serve and to engage and involve those who might not otherwise participate in political debate. So today's initiative is not new, but it is very much about being responsive, engaging and involving you in the business community. And after last year's conference, one attendee told us the experience was better than going to the pictures. So, I'm not sure we can match that again, actually, but I do hope you enjoy it. I think the person went on that he was pleased to see us not behaving as if we were on camera. That's his words. Well, we're not on camera this morning, but please feel free to tag, tweet, post, blog, vlog, poke, like, friend, favourite, or otherwise engage on social media. But when you do, please could you put your phone to silent mode for the conference. I'm just checking I've done that myself. Now I have a list of thank yous. Business in the Parliament is coordinated by the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government and overseen by CBI, Chambers of Commerce, IOD, SCDI, Scottish Financial Enterprise, Women's Enterprise Scotland and Young Enterprise Scotland. I'm also particularly grateful to members of the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee for the important part that they play, and to Scottish Government ministers and officials and those of you speaking in the workshops, plus all our parliamentary staff who make today possible. But it is, of course, your event, and I hope that you do engage with all the politicians and representatives who will be here today. There will be plenty of opportunity through question and answer sessions with our keynote speakers, in the workshops, chatting over coffee, quizzing the cross-party group of MSPs later, and networking at the post-conference lunch. But let me start by introducing our first speaker, the convener of the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee. Gordon Lyndhurst studied law at Edinburgh, Glasgow and Heidelberg universities. He was called to the bar in 1995 and elected as an MSP for the Lothians in 2016. And that's not the limit of his talents. I understand that last October, he took part in the Apprentice for the Day scheme, shadowing 2 trainee joiners. I don't know if you know the rate for a joiner in Glasgow, but I think there's a third career for Gordon beckoning. Gordon Lyndhurst. Gordon Lyndhurst, if I could ask you to address our conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And the pudding was indeed very good last night, and I hope those who were there last night enjoyed it. So, First Minister, fellow MSPs, including those committee colleagues that I see here this morning, welcome to all of our guests from us, the parliamentarians in this room, to our place of work here in the Scottish Parliament. Today is, however, about engagement, not about the things we politicians tend to do here, which is argue about things or perhaps, to put it more politely, discuss things. So it's about dialogue today, not dispute. We won't agree on everything, of course, but then what a dull place the world would be if we all agreed all the time about everything. Although we might, some of us at least, prefer that the political world was slightly duller than it is at the moment. However, the point of this conference is to encourage a conversation. Our theme this year is leadership. What does leadership mean? John Buchan, the author of the 39 Steps, said, "The task of leadership is not to put greatness into humanity, but to elicit it, for the greatness is already there." We'll be hearing more about leadership from our guest keynote speaker, and also the First Minister shortly. But first, let me offer a flavour of what the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee has done over the past year. We've inquired into business support, the construction sector, debt recovery schemes. We're currently scrutinising bills to establish the Scottish National Investment Bank and also Consumer Scotland. We've reviewed policy in areas such as regional selective assistance, offshore wind and land registration. Plus, surprise, surprise, we've also looked at many Brexit-related subordinate legislation instruments. Now, I've already mentioned the SNIB bill. The Scottish National Investment Bank is not a bank as such in the commercial sense, and not in the retail sense. Essentially, it's an investment trust. It is a vehicle intended to drive transformative change, economic, societal, and environmental. It is to be independent, but accountable. It is to be permanent, but adaptable. And it is to take a long-term, sustainable, and patient view of investment. Economist Mariana Mazzucato told us, and I quote, "The bank is a wonderful experiment in Scotland to see precisely what it would be like to transform our imagination of what the public sector is for." The Economy Committee was not entirely persuaded that the bill proposed matched that ambition, and we did ask the Scottish Government to reflect on this and invited it to consider how non-financial returns might be better reflected and ways in which success could and should be measured. And I'm pleased to say the Scottish Government appears to be receptive on these points, with the Cabinet Secretary undertaking to bring forward some amendments at stage 2 of the bill. So such is the view from the committee, Presiding Officer. And now to our speakers. Robin Watson comes from a fishing town on the west coast, I understand. He was born in the same year that Canada turned 100. And also the Jungle Book opened at your local Odeon. Now, whether that was a better picture than the conference we have today or not will be up to you to judge, I suppose. With a professional background in engineering, he has served in the Merchant Navy, and he also apparently seems to retain a fondness for nautical metaphors. In the context of turbulent economic times, he has suggested, and I quote, "We could say we're all doomed, which is hardly inspiring. We're going to end up shipwrecked." Though in fairness, he went on to add, "Is the sky clearing? Where is it clearing? Let's sail for the chunks of sunshine." He was awarded Director of the Year 2019, with the panel commending his, and again I quote, "leadership in circumstances which required bold and decisive action, yet maintained corporate strength, robustness, and integrity." Or, if you prefer, perhaps, sailing in search of sunshine. Now, our final speaker this morning needs no introduction. Nicola Sturgeon is, of course, Scotland's First Minister and Scotland's 5th First Minister in her 5th year in the job, in the 21st year of the Scottish Parliament. So much for the statistics. She is apparently an admirer of Adam Smith's other book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. During a recent TED talk here in Edinburgh, she echoed Smith's view that the value of any government is judged in the proportion to the extent that it makes its people happy. On Desert Island Discs, Kirsty Young has spoken of the First Minister's, and I quote, "twin ability to appear both super smart and untypically straightforward." The First Minister told Kirsty she was reading Charles Moore's biography of Margaret Thatcher because of her interest in, and again I quote, "the art and science of decision-making." In other words, leadership, hopefully to elicit the greatness which is already there, to set sail in search of clear skies and sunshine. But true leadership also knows something else. And of course, the presiding officer last night at the end of his remarks at dinner stole my pre-prepared line out of this speech when he said, "It's when you are a leader, you have to know when to stop." So, like him, I will stop at this point and hand back to him.
Thank you very much indeed, Gordon. And now, if I can, I would like to call our first speaker, Robin Watson, Chief Executive of Wood, or now Wood, was formerly the Wood Group, to speak to the lectern. Robin Watson, thank you.
Well, thank you, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Presiding Officer, First Minister, and a big thank you to the Scottish Parliament for asking me to speak to you today for the first time as Chief Executive of Wood. Just to clarify things, I never said any of that stuff that Gordon just attributed to me. The theme, however, is leadership, and many of the sentiments that Gordon made are absolutely front and centre as to the leadership considerations we've got. In that context, I'm going to talk through the company that I'm fortunate enough to lead, how it's evolved, and I'll try and articulate the leadership position to which we aspire in today's ever-changing and often very disruptive world. I'll also share some personal reflections of leadership for myself, explain my own journey and how my experiences have shaped my views and informed the decisions that I make. So firstly, let me just start with Wood. Over 2 years ago, a new global project management, engineering, consulting and technical services business was formed when Wood Group acquired Amec Foster Wheeler. Headquartered in Aberdeen, the company now has 60,000 people across the world. We've got 400 offices and we're in 60 countries. We're one of only 4 organisations of our shape, scale and size doing what we do in our markets globally, and obviously I'm very proud to be in that position. That global proposition, however, was born very much locally. The Wood Group was a company steeped in the north-east of Scotland. It has a rich heritage. It was a fishing fleet back in the 19th century, owned by the Wood family. It operated out of the port of Aberdeen. We're still headquartered in Aberdeen. The business then evolved into ship repairing, marine engineering, and from the 1970s into oilfield services as the North Sea took off during that period. Under Sir Ian Wood's leadership, which stretched from 1967 till 2012, that's quite a thought, 1967 to 2012, the business obviously went from strength to strength. It became one of the world's leading oilfield services companies, and I would personally cite Sir Ian certainly as one of the most significant business creators, leaders, and obviously now philanthropists that this country has ever produced. And all that being said, the one lesson that I have learned is the world in front of us is seldom exactly like the world behind us. So whilst it is important to remain grounded, be really reflective of the heritage that we actually have, I think it's actually more so important to be agile, to remain relevant in what is an ever-changing world. And it certainly, I see it as my job as Chief Executive of the company that we need to embrace that concept here. We need to lead the company into new areas, face up to the new challenges, and make the most of the opportunities that these challenges present us. So in recent years, we've doubled the size of the company. We've reduced by 2/3 our reliance on upstream oil and gas. We've broadened both our footprint and our capability, and we continually evolve to ensure that we're not only well positioned today, but we face up to the challenges of tomorrow. And that's a very fine balance that many of us need to make. So we reflect on what we call the mega trends. What are they? Energy transition, the need for sustainable infrastructure, the fourth industrial revolution around digitisation and technology, and obviously the impact of all of these on the future skills and service requirements. So I'll come back to these mega trends first, but a wee bit about my own personal journey. So as Gordon alluded to, I grew up in Campbelltown on the Mull of Kintyre. I was the first in the family to go to university. We lived in a small council flat in a town built around a bedrock of fishing, farming and whisky. Not a bad mix, to be perfectly candid with you. I left school at 17 to join the Merchant Navy, and at that time, like many people with my background, university just didn't cross my mind, despite having the appropriate qualifications. So I took to the sea, travelling to many places and experiencing many different cultures. And it really was a thrilling experience at that time in my life. Surrounded by the vast engine rooms and the ships I was on, I was really struck by the power of engineering. And with the emergence of the new cities and infrastructure, particularly in Asia, it was the likes of which I'd never seen before. So this kind of intrigue with engineering and architecture, it really was inspiring at a very significant time in my own life. The career at sea, that funded my university education. So today I do remain a bit of an evangelist, I'm afraid, about the profession of engineering and the role that we do play and can play. And maybe it's sometimes overlooked a little bit or sidelined. Because I do feel that science and engineering is actually the solution to help solve some of the biggest challenges facing us today. And that includes climate change and the need for sustainable cities and infrastructure. I also reflect on some of the consistent themes in my professional life. And one of the hallmarks has been, and I only say that on reflection, I turned 50 a couple of years ago, you start to think about things, curiosity. And I think I've always been curious about the world, not only immediately around me, but maybe a little further afield, particularly as trends in technology and innovation evolve. And I do feel as curious now as I was when I was 17. And to be quite candid with you, I feel I need to be as curious now as I was when I was 17, if in fact not even more so. So as an engineer in the leadership role I have at Wood, it's perhaps helpful to explain why I've led such a significant transformation over the past 4 years, to broaden our horizons beyond the oil and gas sector and our traditional engineering capability into new services and solutions across the energy transition and the built and natural environment. And that explanation is inevitably faceted. So, as I said earlier, the opportunity for engineers, technologists and scientists, they are actually the type of people that make up my organisation. They will help create the world of tomorrow. They've done it to the world of today and yesterday, and they'll create the world of tomorrow. It's also, however, about both mitigating risk and maximising opportunity in a business context. It's a bit about understanding, really, that to lead, bold positions sometimes do need to be taken, and with it, some challenging decisions. So to be leaders in our industries, we need not only to deliver to today, but to position for the challenges of the future, to be ready to explore, to find the answers and the solutions to the questions which society, in its very broadest sense, is increasingly posing. That longer-term perspective with a focus on strong short-term performance has always been a bit of a hallmark of my personal leadership worldview. And it's for these reasons you'll see a marked and deliberate shift in our footprint as an organisation. So whilst oil and gas does remain important to us, and I'll come on to why, it no longer defines us. And we're very satisfied with the repositioning we've achieved for the business, but there's much more for us to do. So let me go back to these megatrends, and I'll take a minute or two on each of them. The energy transition. World population growth, economic development and urbanisation are all at odds with the pressing need to reduce our carbon footprint, and somehow we need to square that circle. As regards population, from the establishment of agriculture, it took 10,000 years for 1 billion people to be on the planet. From we invented a way to plant things and grow things 10,000 years before we had 1 billion people. The second billion took 130 years. And our population has doubled since 1970. We predict a global population of almost 10 billion people, which is by 2050. That is an uptick of 1/3 on the current population. With respect to urbanisation, city population growth just now is about 65 million people per annum move to cities. By 2050, we anticipate almost 70% of the world's population will live in cities, and as such, urban living will increase by 1/3 by 2050. However, to meet the Paris Agreement, carbon emissions need to reduce by 40% in the same period. This is inevitably, and quite obviously, a really significant challenge, a significant challenge for all of us. However, this is an energy transition, and it's not a single event, and it's not an overnight event. I'm actually optimistic that science and engineering, combined with the appropriate political imperative, will help solve the problem. Personally, I'd like to see language around the subject shift a little bit. Maybe a language more of opportunity. Simply energy transition, perhaps, to securing the transition, sustainably, reliably, affordably, and for us to take the lead in delivering it, in conjunction with the support and infrastructure that we will need to make energy consumption more efficient. So, some observations that I would offer. Firstly, there is quite rightly unstoppable momentum to reduce carbon emissions. I think this is a good thing, and it's a challenge that's technically solvable. Secondly, as I hinted at earlier, this is about the supply, storage, distribution and consumption of energy. And they are all inextricably linked. Energy storage and distribution challenges are not insignificant, and there is no current solution to them. Batteries, even if they provided all the storage solutions, which they don't, do not come with zero carbon footprint. Batteries are minerals that are mined and extracted, processed, manufactured, distributed, and then through that, they're then charged and disposed of. There is no solution with zero carbon footprint in that regard as regard storage. So debates that really pitch bad stuff and good stuff are often misleadingly simplistic and can also be, to be quite candid, on occasion at odds with both technology and science. So we need to be cautious of that. Thirdly, we should be wary of shifting our carbon footprint. You know, one consequence of this is no doubt you create a worse carbon footprint than you would have had if you had control of it yourself. If we use steel and cement industries as a proxy for this shift, the UK has been a net importer of coal for quite a number of years, and it gets used in both power and manufacturing. So amongst other things, coking coal is used to drive the oxygen out of iron ore to make steel, and it's also used in the kilns for cement manufacturing. So our basic questions for us is, are we going to stop using materials such as steel or cement for alternative materials, or are we going to get someone else to supplement our requirements with the artificial effect of reducing our footprint, but doing nothing to the overall environment? Just a bit of context, incidentally, you know, in Britain we produce 8 million tonnes of steel per annum. China produces 800 million, just to give you an idea of scale. And finally, actually, just recognising there's a bridge to provide secure alternative energy to the world. Fossil fuels will inevitably form part of the solution in any reliable energy managed and manageable transition. Accepting, however, and this is an important point, that cannot be on an open-ended basis. Carbon capture and storage solutions have the potential to accelerate the development of alternative natural energy supplies, such that natural gas, but with zero carbon footprint, can be used to supplement wind, tidal and solar energy sources to ensure the necessary levels of available, reliable and usable energy at point of demand. So energy transition, I mean, it's a subject in itself worthy of many, many hours of debate and discussion. It is complex. It's got contradictory drivers, there's no doubt. Fundamentally, however, we do need to ensure that we're firmly on the healthy planet trajectory. There's absolutely no question around that. The second megatrend affecting our world is the growing and obvious need for more sustainable infrastructure. At the start of the last century, around 17% of the world's population lived in cities, and as I touched on earlier, by 2050 that's 70%. That's a significant shift in a relatively short period. In the developed economies of the world, this puts a significant strain of infrastructure that's at least 100 years old. We're speaking in Edinburgh today, and with some irony, the new town, that's what we call it, is 200 years old. The new town. So it's not lost on us that what we did 200 years ago will not be fit for purpose over the next 100 years. It just can't be, because we can't have foreseen all the challenges that we would get. And most of the cities are a lot older than that, as we well know. On the other side of the equation, in the developing world, we see the continued need to build at pace, filling significant gaps in infrastructure as population growth and energy requirements actually increase, right back to that population question. So I've got 2 points to make on sustainable infrastructure. One, there's an inextricable link to the climate change agenda, energy security and transition debate, and we need to ensure the cities and developments of the future use different materials and are more efficient and effective than the developments that we've had in the past, and they need to continually evolve. And actually, Wood, this company, like many others, have a role to play where the project management, technical consultant, engineering capabilities we have are front and centre in solving these issues, technically solving these issues. Petrochemicals, for example, will continue to provide the polymers and speciality chemicals which are all around us today and which will inevitably play a role in developing the new solutions and the new materials that we'll need for tomorrow. The third trend is around digitalisation and our fourth industrial revolution. And from the 18th to 21st centuries, there's been 3 significant industrial revolutions, and that was part and parcel of the population growth, in fact. And whilst these industrial revolutions have done an awful lot to improve living standards and life expectancy, each of them has a significant impact on our built and natural environment. We're now in the fourth, digital, and that's one that's disrupting us with regard to pace and scale. The phone to the smartphone journey. For the younger in the audience, a phone used to have a cable that came out the back of it. The rest of us know that. It took 100 years to get rid of the cable. But in the last 20 years, we've managed to take a PC that could put the man in the moon in our pocket. That's back to front. It took 40 years for 50 million people to have a radio. It took just under a year for 50 million people to have Twitter. And, you'll like this one, it took just under a month for 50 million people to play Angry Birds. That's the type of pace that we're talking about here, and it is unprecedented. In the 1980s, we had 2 terabytes of internet connectivity. That's 2 trillion bytes to the non-scientists in the room. By the early 2020s, we'll have 2 yottabytes. That's 2 trillion bytes. That's a trillion-fold increase in the last 35 years. And staggeringly, 90% of the data in the world has been generated in the last 2 years. That's the scale that we're talking about in terms of this revolution. So some real food for thought. This is a significant disruption here. I think the link between digital and technology, innovation and future skills required is significant. The man-machine interface is and will continue to change. Augmented reality is already part of our offering to our customers. Virtual reality is something very important to us and will continue to be so. And actually, cloud engineering, that will just be the inevitable journey that we are on, and it's the way we would find our solutions moving forward. So that digital revolution is very much upon us. It's opening up a new world of both opportunity and disruption, which we're very focused on ensuring our position at the forefront of useful, solutions-focused digital engineering is front and centre across our service offering. So how do we do business to make a difference across these megatrends, which is shaping all of our lives? Well, as a company, I think we need a compelling and sustainable proposition to society as a whole, staff, customers, our current and future investors, but as well as that, in the communities we live and work locally. It's my firm belief we need to embrace, engage and continually emerge as a sustainable corporate citizen with an irrefutable licence to operate, where we are literally at the forefront of engineering the fundamental changes society needs, unlocking and improving the energy transition, sustainable infrastructure, using digitisation to good and ensuring we've got good quality future jobs here. So that hunger to learn and explore possibilities should never really leave any of us. When I look at Wood, it's not hard to be really excited about the things we do. And I marvel at the capability of our people and the people we work for to really pretty much do anything. We put pipelines in the seabed, we construct tunnels, we design and build power plants. We program the robots for the automotive industry, and we work right across the life cycle of some of the world's most ambitious renewables projects, from diligence and feasibility required to measuring their success, and into construction operations, maintenance and performance, and ultimately repurposing the assets. Thanks to virtual reality, we can get customers a pair of goggles in our office in Aberdeen, take them to the seabed with a torch, opening and closing virtual valves. Or we can go into a vast tract of land looking at how a wind farm will shape it before it even exists. And we can show how their assets can be simplified, made more efficient and made more sustainable. So that's what ingenuity looks like today. And the innate curiosity of people will only take us further and make it easier to drive change for all. So, 21st century business leadership. In my view, it's about courage, being curious and tenacious, and taking a longer view. It's about motivating people in the business to perform better tomorrow than we have today, and lifting those who need a helping hand. And it's about constantly asking why and what if. A final word or two about how we look at some of the challenges and draw inspirations from the leaders that have gone before us. I'll go back to 1961. Given where I am, it was a speech to the US Congress that President John F. Kennedy made, stating his ambition that the United States would put a man on the moon. And it was to NASA, of course, that JFK looked to fulfill that promise. And named after the Greek god of light, music and sun, but you didn't know that, the Apollo program was launched. 50 years ago, in 1969, Apollo 11 saw Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin become the first human beings to walk on the moon, as we all know the story. So there are obviously any number of lessons that we can take from that particular enterprise. But I take one simple lesson, and that is that even with a passionate, compelling and courageous vision, actually the progress to deliver it takes discipline, patience, teamwork, authenticity, tenacity, structure, and many more things. Lots of hard work. And knowing what we know now of Neil Armstrong, I would put in there a good dose of humility as well. So applied well, these factors drive what we call at Wood peak performance. And it's that peak performance, pushing ourselves to do better tomorrow than we did today, that will ensure that companies like ours, and actually right across Scotland, will remain competitive and successful for the generations to come. So, thank you for listening, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you here today.
Robin, I'm just conscious of time. I think what we're going to do, if you don't mind, is I'm going to take questions to yourself and the First Minister after the First Minister.
Sure. Just
because I know that the First Minister has to launch a party election manifesto this morning. So we're working to a particular schedule. So, Robin, thank you for that. We don't hear often from business people in the community in the chamber, and far fewer times from engineers, and I have to say that was fascinating. So hold on to your questions, and I'd now like to ask the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, to address us.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Thank you to Gordon for opening our session today and setting the scene so well. And my sincere thanks to Robin for such an inspiring and extremely thought-provoking speech. And I think listening to Robin this morning is a real reminder of what it is that makes this Business and Parliament conference such a valuable event. So thank you very much. The first of these conferences was actually held back in 2004, which was just 5 years after the Scottish Parliament reconvened. It was part then of an ongoing effort from the new Parliament to engage much more closely with business. And at the first meeting, the presiding officer at that time, George Reid, expressed his hope that by sitting together and debating, questioning and arguing, our politicians and business community will forge a better understanding of each other's role in building a better Scotland. In the years since, I really do think that this conference has largely achieved that aim. As a result, it has played a part in many of the achievements of the devolution era. There's no doubt whatsoever that Scotland has made significant progress during that period, although we still have much, much more to do. Unemployment is at historically low levels, but we know that too many people are still in low-paid or insecure jobs. We have almost entirely closed the productivity gap that used to exist between Scotland and the rest of the UK, but we still lag significantly behind many of our European neighbours. We've had consistent success in increasing our international exports and also in attracting inward investment to our country, but that progress, of course, is now at risk by the prospect of Brexit. Now, I'm sure you'll be very glad and a bit relieved to know that I don't actually intend to say very much about Brexit at all this morning. That is an issue that will be discussed at length, no doubt, over the course of the ongoing election campaign and beyond that. I simply want to, in very brief terms, restate the government's view, the Scottish Government's view, that while there are some forms of Brexit that would be more damaging than others, our view is that there is no good Brexit for Scotland, which is why I believe if there is an opportunity to reverse that prospect, it's an opportunity that should be taken. But, and this is more important to what I'm going to say this morning, we're determined that Brexit should not distract us from some of the other issues facing the country and should not stop us seizing the opportunities that lie before us as well. In fact, Brexit in many respects heightens the importance of addressing these. In his speech, Robin talked about some of the global trends of the future, and I want to start today really at the point that Robin finished. Robin spoke about the space race of the 1960s. I'm delighted to say I don't personally remember it, but I obviously have read and heard much about it. And, you know, in many ways, Robin is absolutely right here. The equivalent of that challenge for our generation is the move towards a zero emissions world. But in this case, it's not simply a matter of exploration or of testing our own limits. Meeting this challenge is essential for the survival and the sustainability of our planet. And while the space race was almost entirely led by two global superpowers, tackling climate change is a test, a challenge, and an imperative, a moral imperative for societies right across the world. And every country, even a relatively small country like ours, can make a difference. And Scotland, the nation that led the Industrial Revolution, is once again leading the way. Just over a month ago, this Parliament passed a new climate change bill. It contains the most ambitious targets for reducing emissions anywhere in the world. Carbon neutrality by 2040, net zero emissions overall by 2045. Now, meeting those targets will require changes to how we travel, how we design our cities and towns, how we heat our homes and buildings. And it will need to be a truly national endeavour where every sector, every individual plays their full part. And it will pose challenges. It will pose big challenges and it will pose a range of smaller challenges as well. Let me mention just one. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the annual conference of the Scottish Grocers Federation. And amongst other things, I spoke there about the Scottish Government's proposals for a deposit return scheme for drinks containers to help us reduce waste and build a more circular economy. That will be the first scheme of its kind anywhere in the UK. And while the Scottish Government are designing the scheme, it will be retailers themselves that will have the responsibility of delivering it. So we've worked with them very closely and listened carefully to the issues they've raised. For example, some retailers were concerned that if they install machines to recycle drinks containers, their business rates will go up as a result, as the valuation of their properties increase. So I was able to announce at that conference the introduction of a rates release scheme to make sure that won't happen. And that's just one example, arguably quite a small one, of an important point. The scale of action we need at times will present real challenges. And as a government, our job is to make sure we support businesses as you face up to those challenges. But it also presents major opportunities, and I'm absolutely with Robin on this point. Often we talk too much about the challenges, and we shouldn't because we can't shy away from those. But we should talk much more about the opportunities to create jobs and economic growth, the opportunities to improve our health and well-being by reducing waste and pollution. And again, we are determined to ensure that Scotland's businesses are supported to seize those opportunities. Robin gave a very good example of that when he spoke about the oil and gas industry, one of the most important sectors in our economy for the last 40 years. The Scottish Government is determined to work with the Oil and Gas Technology Centre to develop the renewable technologies that can be integrated with our oil and gas infrastructure in the future. And a really good example and very important example of that is carbon capture, utilisation and storage. We have the potential to become a world leader in that technology, and we want to support the sector in realising that potential. And there are lots of other examples. As all of us know, Scotland has huge strengths in wave, tidal and offshore wind power. We also have emerging strengths and technologies like smart grids and battery storage. We must carry on supporting those industries as well as seeking investment in other areas too. That's why, for example, we are in the process now of developing and bringing to market a new green investment portfolio. That will comprise projects worth at least £3 billion initially, covering areas like heat, waste, power generation and property. And through it, we are seeking to attract investors to Scotland from around the world. We've also announced that securing net zero will be the primary mission of the new Scottish National Investment Bank. The bank's role will be to provide patient finance for ambitious companies and for big infrastructure proposals. The Scottish Government will be investing over £2 billion of capital over the first 10 years of the life of the bank, and the intention is that that will lead to further private sector investment. I know the bank will be the focus of one of the workshops later on. Gordon mentioned it in his introduction, so I hope as many of you take part in that discussion as possible, because if we get this right, and we are determined to do so with the help of Gordon's committee, I truly believe that the new bank can and will have a transformative effect on Scotland's economy. Of course, the Investment Bank is also an example of how we are seeking to promote innovation, because we all understand how important that is for the future. I mentioned earlier on the challenge of increasing productivity. Some researchers estimate that more than 60% of productivity comes from innovation. That's why we are seeking to promote a culture of innovation right across our economy. We've significantly increased government support for research and development. We are continuing to support innovation centres covering areas like precision medicine, biotechnology and big data. And we've invested in a National Manufacturing Institute, the new lightweight manufacturing centre in Renfrew. The first stage of that project was opened in May. But of course, we're not just focusing our support on the high-tech industries. We have a job to help every business across the country to increase their productivity. And part of that is about providing the infrastructure that businesses need. To that end, we are investing heavily in broadband capabilities as well as in our transport network. But it's also about more specific measures. For example, in August, we launched 2 pilot productivity clubs. They're a joint initiative between government and the SCDI. The clubs bring businesses together so they can share ideas on issues like improving managerial capability and embracing new technology. They're about making sure that businesses share best practice and are able to learn from each other. We're linking businesses in a similar way as part of our work on exports. With the Export Challenge, we've created a new mentoring programme which allows businesses to learn from experienced exporters. And that, again, is really crucial to productivity. We know that when companies export, they're more likely to adopt new approaches and become more efficient in the process. The final area I want to touch on this morning relates to fair work. And again, we've been working hard with businesses on this through the Fair Work Convention. Research, and there's a wealth of it now, shows that adopting fair work practices isn't just the right thing to do, although it is. It also helps to drive business productivity. It's one way in which we can build a more innovative, open and productive economy, as well as creating the fairer and happier society that Adam Smith, of course, said should be one of the purposes of all governments. So as I travel across the country, I'm really encouraged to see how many businesses are now taking this issue seriously. It's also great to see how many businesses are now, for example, paying the living wage. I first spoke at this conference in 2015. Back then, Scotland had around 300 accredited living wage employers. That figure now stands at over 1,600. We've got 700 companies signed up to the Scottish Business Pledge. And all of that demonstrates a growing recognition that fair work benefits both employers and employees. And I hope it's another example where government and businesses are working together and showing the benefits of doing so to strengthen the economy, but also to improve people's lives. Robin spoke about new challenges, but actually when you look at what's happened in Western economies over the past few decades, striking that balance between sustainable growth and fairness is one of the key challenges that we have faced. Scotland, with a focus on innovation and well-being, is in many ways pioneering a new approach to that challenge, just as we are taking the lead in tackling climate change. But of course, government cannot lead on our own. We have the principal responsibility to set the direction and make sure we are taking the actions to support that. But we can only lead effectively by listening and by working with others, not least by businesses the length and breadth of the country, which is why events like this one are so important to making sure that we are able to meet all of these big challenges that we are talking about today. I started earlier on with a quote from the very first Business in the Parliament conference from George Reid. I want to close by quoting from another speech that day from one of my predecessors as First Minister, Jack McConnell. He said that devolution was an opportunity for a new relationship between the Parliament and businesses large and small. In the years since, while there have been many things we have disagreed on, that new relationship has prospered and it has brought significant benefits to our country and is helping to make us a stronger, fairer and more prosperous country. So my hope is that today's event, like all of its predecessors, will help us to build on these achievements. I hope it will further deepen our sense of common purpose and in doing so equip all of us that bit better to face up to and address these big defining challenges of the future. So I wish all of you the very best for a very productive morning, and I look forward to working with all of you in the months and years to come. Thank you very much for your time and being here.
Thank you very much, First Minister. And I wonder, Robin, could I ask you to come back out and join the First Minister? And I said earlier that the cameras are not on, but actually the cameras clearly are on. There's one right in front of you. And so that's why I'm asking you, because I was going to get you to answer questions from your seat. But we have a question and answer session with Robin Watson and the First Minister. So please put your hand up, catch my eye, and when I ask you to... Can I just say you're much better behaved than the MSPs normally are in these seats, so it wouldn't be hard, yes. Thank you very much. And if you could stand up and then introduce yourself, and the microphone will come on when you stand up.
Good morning, I'm Carolyn Curry from Women's Enterprise Scotland. We've heard a lot this morning about the productivity gap and the need for innovation and digitisation. So my question is, when are we going to tackle our people infrastructure to address the pervasive gender gap in enterprise participation and growth and give women much greater access to business creation, to business growth, and also access to the key tools for growth and productivity like digitisation and like innovation?
And are you directing that to the First Minister?
Oh, to both, I think, actually. Oil and gas sector doesn't have a great gender diversity track record, I observe.
I have to resist the temptation just to hand all the questions. I don't often get the opportunity to hand the questions to somebody else to answer. I think we're doing that already, Carolyn. You do a great job in raising these issues, our Women in Enterprise strategy, all of the different strands that flow from that. We've also, if I can just take this at a bigger level, and there are many issues that come to the fore there. Access to finance for women setting up their own businesses is one of them, and one that we are determined to challenge. But at a more macro level, one of the things we've tried to do over the last few years is actually expand our definition of what economic infrastructure actually is. When we are in the process right now, coming to the final stages of doubling the provision of state-funded childcare. And I have deliberately on many occasions talked about that as part of the infrastructure of our country. For many women, and childcare shouldn't be and isn't just a women's issue, but many women do have primary caring responsibility. Having access to childcare, if you want to pursue a career or start a business, is just as important to you as the transport that takes you to your place of work. So we need to make sure that we are building the infrastructure for our country that enables us to do the hard work of closing some of the inequities, and the gender gap is definitely one of those, and perhaps one of the biggest of those. And from all of that flows the access to finance, the gender pay gap, which is closing, but far, far too slowly. We've got much work to do there. If we set up, and this is my final point, if we set up in Scotland, and this is true of many countries, if women set up businesses at the same rate as men do, the addition to our national income would be vast. So there is a real economic imperative here as well as a social one.
I feel like taking a serve after Andy Murray, but anyway, I'll give it a go. If I can, I'll just talk specifically about our company. Our gender pay gap is 14%. However, we don't have any inequality in pay. It's the type of roles that we have in the organisation, which is an issue in itself. My executive team is 50% female. Given that 25% of 12-year-olds studying sciences are female, actually we think that's actually quite a good position for us to be in. Take it very seriously. And probably the only other point I would make, as a global business, probably our bigger challenge around diversity actually is national diversity and broadening that mix rather than just gender, per se.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I've got a question right at the back there.
Thank you very much. Gavin Neat of a technology company working predominantly in disability, and it really is a follow-on to the lady's point there, that gender is of course incredibly important, but if we look around the room, and I understand that 75% of people who are disabled have hidden disabilities, but I think it's important to understand that with 18% of the population being disabled, this is maybe an even bigger issue than the gender pay gap, and this isn't an us and them type statement, but it is more designed around the fact that unless we have a truly diverse workforce, we really can't reflect some of the greatest challenges we have in our society. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think, it's not going to surprise anybody here to know that I think closing the gender gap in pay in all other respects is a really big priority for any society. But it's not the only facet of inequality and often discrimination, and disabilities is another. Again, to talk about government strategies, which are only ever part of the solution, implementing them is what counts. But we have a strategy about closing the employment gap for people with disabilities. People with disabilities are far more likely to be unemployed than people without disabilities, even if they feel they have a contribution to make. So we have a very focused strategy which is involves working with businesses to try to encourage businesses to see the abilities of people with disability and how they can contribute to their business growth, but also working with people with disabilities to try to help them overcome some of the barriers that they face. All of this is work that inevitably takes time, but it is absolutely vital that we do it and succeed in doing it if we are to utilise and benefit from the talents of the whole country. And any country, Scotland or any other country, will only ever achieve its full potential if it allows every individual within it to achieve their full potential. So these questions are absolutely fundamental to the success of our economy in the future.
Thank you very much. I've got a question right at the back there. Yes, the gentleman there. Thank you.
Good morning. First Minister, just building on your comment around using the talents of people from all around Scotland, and I'm very heartened, Robin, with your specific comment around race diversity in the workplace as well. I'm Charandeep Singh, Deputy Chief Executive at the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, and delighted this morning that we've got representation from Caithness right through to Dumfries and Galloway Chamber of Commerce. Robin, you mentioned in your commentary around the population growth, and 70% of the population will live in cities around the world. And I'm probably just a little bit more interested this morning in the 30% that won't be living in cities, and how will we make sure that every community in Scotland is taking on the economic journey that we're going on and that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I talked at an SCDI conference maybe 3 or 4 years ago about infrastructure, infrastructure in Scotland. And I think we've got a wonderful infrastructure in Scotland. It's just for the wrong century. And I think that is one of the challenges that we have. And the balance in that is, it is a challenge that we all have. I specifically talk about the pace and scale. And I think that is a real challenge for us when you're so far ahead of the pack 150 years ago in terms of the developed economies. You can quickly become behind the pack as emergent economies skip technological generations. Across rural India, there are no telegraph poles. You just go straight to mobile phones and you just skip a generation of job creation, industrial revolution, etc. But you come up far quicker with far bigger coverage with updated technology. I mean, I applaud a lot of the things that we do in Scotland to try and improve that infrastructure. I don't sense any complacency. And I think one of the challenges is obviously around prioritisation, and another challenge is around funding, actually just making sure the economy is growing. I welcome initiatives like the Scottish Investment Bank, for example, and just trying to plug in today's event, not to paraphrase the First Minister, but it is essential that we contribute to that voice and that solution. The final thing I would have is, as the economy is increasingly digitised, I think the rural economy, there's a bit of a shift there where we no longer need to be victims because we don't actually reside right next to a city. There are different ways of selling our services and products, using these digital platforms usefully. And I think we're kind of at the end of the beginning of that journey. So that's probably the opportunity side of it rather than the kind of challenge side of it that I would offer.
Thank you, Robin. And I've just got a question down here in the front row.
Hi, Robert Keenan, Morgan Stanley. So Robin alluded to fossil fuels as being part of the transition to low carbon, but what is the sort of policy journey that needs to go lockstep with that to encourage private sector investment to shift along the way? Because as he said, it's not indefinite.
That transition is underway. So in the oil and gas sector, and Robin can talk about this much more knowledgeably than I can, obviously, we already see the transfer of skills into renewable energy. I think that is a journey that has to accelerate and pick up pace rapidly. But the skills and the expertise that exist, particularly in the northeast of Scotland, but right through our supply chain, is a huge asset for us as we try to capitalise on our strengths, and much of the technology can be integrated with the challenges that we face in the future. But we have to do this, and one of the things about the transition to a net zero economy that we shouldn't lose sight of, if you think about previous economic transformations, I grew up in the west of Scotland in Ayrshire, and actually the kind of communities I grew up in are still to some extent living with the legacy of past economic transformations that left too many people behind. And that's why we've got to put justice at the heart of the climate transition. Often for understandable reasons, people, climate change campaigners will say, just stop oil and gas exploration right now. Well, firstly, that would make us more dependent on imports, which would increase our carbon footprint, but it would also mean that we weren't thinking about the justice of that transition, how we ensure that the jobs are there for people to move into. So this is an area where we should be optimistic and actually quite excited about the potential of the future, but we've got to get it right, and working between government and industry here is absolutely essential.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's not an awful lot to add to that. My thoughts are, we've been doing carbon capture and storage projects for 15 years now as an organisation. And from a technical perspective, from a skills perspective, I echo everything the First Minister says. We can be at the forefront of carbon capture and storage. And apart from anything else, in practical terms, for the non-technical in the room, we've got lots of geological storage capacity. As we've produced oil and gas from the North Sea, that gives you the storage capacity to re-inject, which is the essence of it. I think one piece of the jigsaw, in fact, is with recent changes in taxation around investment in the North Sea, there is an increasing decommissioning liability that government, in this instance I'm talking about UK government, that UK government now have. That was to encourage investment in assets and unlock stranded reserves. On the back of that, there ends up becoming a large decommissioning cost. I actually believe that carbon capture and storage, with the right blend of private sector, some finance, certainly expertise, and public sector, public funding, is actually in everybody's interest. It puts off your decommissioning liability because you need the assets for longer, keeps people in work because the social contract's there, and it actually addresses our climate challenges. And I think it's a jigsaw that's sitting in front of us, but we just haven't pulled it, together as yet.
Now, I'm conscious that a couple of people caught my eye and more. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to hold on to these questions for later on the session because we've just passed 10 o'clock. I'm very conscious that the First Minister has quite a pressing engagement, general election campaign to launch this morning. Can I just say thank you very much to the First Minister and to Robin Watson in particular for being our keynote speakers this morning. We very much valued both your contributions, and thank you for taking questions too. Can I ask all of you to join me in thanking our guest speakers? There will be plenty of opportunity, sorry to Mary and gentlemen there for not being able to call you. There will be plenty of opportunity to engage with politicians and business people for the rest of the morning and hopefully into the early afternoon. However, we're now going to adjourn shortly. I'm going to ask delegates to go down to the garden lobby where there'll be coffee. Before we do, quick announcement. I know that some may be worried about the Lobbying Act. Did you get instruction about this? So, the Lobbying Act was passed a couple of years ago. It's simply about making sure there's transparency about interactions between our politicians and ministers and members of all sorts of different communities. You are invited guests today, so for the most part, you do not have anything to declare. However, if you are slightly worried about any particular issues you want to raise with ministers, please ask any of our officials who will be able to keep you straight. I think you got an information leaflet, but ask any of our officials who will be here this morning, and they'll keep you straight on this, just in case you are anxious about this matter. Now, on that note, I'm going to ask also all the speakers and co-chairs of the breakout sessions to remain behind. So if you're leading one of the breakout sessions or speaking in it, please stay in the chamber. Otherwise, could I ask everybody to adjourn down to the garden lobby where there will be coffee, and then we'll resume at 10:30 for workshops. Thank you very much.